The first message we're going to have this evening talks about the perfect home, and we're going to hear that by Brother Keith Wilson. Keith Wilson is the youth pastor extraordinaire, as he likes to say, from Cisco, Texas, the Assembly of Yahweh in Cisco, Texas, and we're really glad that he's on the team, and we're going to get things started right now. He's going to come up, make him feel welcome. Keith Wilson.
Hey everybody, how are we doing tonight? Man, I'm so excited to be here. Tonight we're going to have a good time, and we're thankful that you've joined us for the Friday night session. When we talk about the Family Builders Conference committee and we meet and we plan, typically none of the speakers want Friday night because no one typically shows up on Friday night because they're getting off work and everything. So I'm just so thankful that you're here. And I got the Friday night group because this is A-team. Everybody look at your neighbor and say, you're A-team. You're A-team. Yeah, that's the number one team. My name is Keith Wilson, and I'm married to my beautiful wife, Amanda Wilson. We have 3 children, Noah, Abraham, and Eden. They're aged 12, 10, and 8. And it's our delight to be with you. We live in Cisco, Texas, which is in the middle of nowhere, but it's important because we're there, and the assembly is there, and that's why we're there. And we're so glad to be with you this evening. So tonight we're going to open up the topic of the perfect home. And what does that mean but this, and that is perfectionism. All right? So I'm just going to, what I wanted to do tonight is I wanted to do a mic drop thing where I walk up here and I look at you all in the eye and I say, you're not a perfect parent, you don't have perfect kids, get used to disappointment. That's what I wanted to do. I almost did it. All right? But that's the message tonight. If you get anything out of this, I hope it's that. You're not a perfect parent. You don't have perfect kids. Get used to disappointment. Everybody's human. All right, so we got a lot of material to cover tonight, and I hope that I can be a blessing to you. You've got a note section in your books. If you've got those open, we really appreciate it. There's going to be some Q&A at the end of this session, so if you've got a question or maybe you've got a comment to add to it, any disagreements, you can just save those, but any comments in positive regard, you can just make sure to write those down. We'd love to receive those at the end of this seminar. I just want to share with you that I am a perfectionist, so when I'm giving this seminar to you, I know what I'm talking about. And as a perfectionist, it hurt me because tonight we practiced for the opening of this seminar and the opening of this service, and Megan and I were supposed to open with lead worship at the end of the countdown. But we had some delays, and then we prayed, and then I got to thinking about my seminar, and I went back into this room to go over some things and completely forgot that I was the first person to talk to you tonight. Y'all didn't even know that, did you? You just thought, well, Dwayne did. The sound booth team did. So as a perfectionist, I can tell you that hurts my ego and my pride, but like I said, we got to get used to disappointment. So I have some things I'd like to share with you. I'm going to move this over here so I don't keep kicking that cord. All right. I hope you're ready to receive this evening. When we look around us, we're constantly bombarded with messages. You need to buy this product. You need this kind of a job. You need to travel to this destination. You need to try this kind of food. You need to shop at this store. You need to eat at this restaurant. How many of you know what I'm talking about? So many messages, screens, signs, billboards, books, sounds, radio, CDs, talk radio. What are all of these messages saying to us? Here's how to spend your perfect night. Here's where to take your family for the perfect vacation. Here's where you should shop for the perfect experience. Here's the products you should use for that perfect look. When I think about shampoo commercials alone, some of them inappropriate, you know what I'm talking about. And I'm just thinking, man, how much energy goes into our hair. Chew on that for a minute. Here's how you can be the perfect spouse or the perfect mom or the perfect dad. Maybe you're listening to Focus on the Family, or maybe you're listening to Family Talk. And some of us don't listen to that at all because we don't want to be depressed all day. And so there's constant bombardment in there. You guys didn't think that was very funny, but that's okay. You'll You'll get it later, maybe. Just put that one in your pocket, pull it out, you'll get a giggle. Here's how to get fit and have the perfect body. We spend loads of time at the gym getting all pumped up, and well, some of you do. And that's good, for health and all, but we want the perfect body. We want that beach body. Society is blasting us with messages on perfection. We see this on Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat, and the like. People want the perfect selfie to make them look the best. As a youth pastor, I see teenagers taking selfies, and they don't take just one selfie and move on. It's this, and then it's this, and then it's this. It's all, look, all the teenagers are laughing because they know that's true. We want that Instagram to be perfect. We want our image on Facebook to be perfect. We want our perfect family photo where everyone's smiling and we look happy and we're at our best doing the perfect activity, which tells the world that we've got a great home, a perfect house, and a perfect family, and we know how to act. We want to succeed at everything that we do with flying colors. Our kids need to be the best at everything: school, sports, chores, and the like. My daughter Eden, she's 8 years old, like I said, and she was on a little league softball team this year. And she was blessed enough because of her attitude, really not because of ability. Although she's a great softball player, there were some older kids that got chosen for All-Stars. All-Stars is where they pick the best kids off of all of the teams in Cisco, and then they join one awesome team, and then they go and play bigger districts. You all know what All-Stars are. And so Eden got to join the All-Stars team. She's 8, y'all. In Texas, that means you all right? She's 8, y'all, and they were doing practices, and now it's 100 degrees outside. We're in the middle of, at the end of May, the beginning of June. 3 practices a week they wanted her out there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Coaches want to win. We want perfection. We want to go. We want to win. And so that's just the kind of stuff, and that was just for her. And of course, we didn't let her go to all the practices because I was like, no. But yeah, and falling short of perfection as an adult or as a parent is typically seen as embarrassing, or worse, utter failure and humiliating. We put tremendous amounts of pressure on ourselves to perform to perfection in almost all areas of our life. The constant expectation from society, whether stated, implied, or assumed, is that we need to be perfect. In all these messages of perfection, nothing can compare for our perceived need to perform as the perfect parents, raising the perfect kids in a perfect home. How many of you have ever felt that pressure before? Okay, there's one honest person in here. Thank you, Marcel. Love you, brother. All right, I got to be the best parent. I know if that's got to come in your head sometime, right? I got to have great kids. When our kids act up, it's a reflection of me. We can't have that, so we got to have the best kids. The rest of you, this may not be for you, so you can just relax now. Just take it easy. It's just me and you, Marcel. Come on, baby. Love you. Being a perfectionist is tedious. It's exhausting. And in all reality, it's impossible. If what I just expressed doesn't describe your thoughts, expectations of your family, that's wonderful. Now you know what it's like to live a life in the world of Keith, the perfectionist. This, of course, being a perfectionist, is compounded often in life and in the home of the spiritually minded person. After all, you might quickly point out that the Bible clearly instructs believers to be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect, Matthew 5:48. Or you should walk as he walked. You have all heard those things before. Another area of misunderstood doctrine is the idea of gaining Yahweh's approval through lawful behavior and Torah observance. Now, I hope I'm not stepping on your toes here, so let me say it again, just in case I missed. Another area of misunderstood doctrine is the idea of gaining Yahweh's approval through lawful behavior and Torah observance. Many have been trained that our righteousness before Yahweh is based on how well we live up to his expectations, and that he's laid out for us in written form in the written code. As we strive to win his approval, we find ourselves falling short. For the perfectionist, these failings serve to point out that which we already know so deeply about ourselves and is ingrained in our minds will never be good enough. But we just keep on trying. In addition to this, the assembly itself can become a place of great expectations of perfection, especially when dealing with the members. As Dr. Larry Crabb said in his book, Effective Biblical Counseling, he says this: because we worry about these things, not really believing the Scripture, we tend to look at other Christians for confirmation of our acceptability. Their approval becomes too important, so we try to please them in order to gain their approval. At that point, we begin to feel pressure to measure up to them. When we don't satisfy what we believe are their expectations, we feel guilty and avoid them or deceive them. Fellowship is broken. When we do our best and they show disapproval or fail to praise our efforts, we get angry with them. So much of our Christian activity is motivated by a personal desire to win someone's approval and hence become acceptable. I'm not sure if that is resonating with you, but it certainly is resonating with me. We seldom, and because of this, we seldom feel like revealing our weaknesses and our vulnerability around our peers, specifically in the assembly. So not only is the perfectionist receiving constant input from society about perfection, but also from the assembly, fellow believers, and seemingly the Holy Bible. So of course, it's reasonable to do our best and give Yahweh all of our effort and strive for excellence. But does he expect perfection? Now I want to just take a moment and look into an interesting short story in Holy Scripture in the book of Luke, where Martha is preparing to entertain and host the King of Kings. Now just imagine, I can't, Marcel, just imagine you're preparing your house for Yeshua to come in and dine with your family. Okay, what's going through our minds? Everything's got to be? Come on, it's the King of Kings. This is the man who's healing people, who's making some 3 or 4 loaves into like lots of them, and making fish, and he's like walking on water and doing weird stuff. And you know, you weren't there for the party, but you heard that he turned water into wine, and that was pretty cool. So he's coming to your house to stay. What's your house going to look like? Perfect. You're going to sweep, you're going to mop, you're going to make sure. How many of you have that closet where when somebody surprises you and said, I'm almost there, and you didn't know they were coming over, you got that closet that everything just goes into, right? And they walk in, and maybe they're looking for the bathroom later that evening, and they go to that closet door, and you're like, no, don't open that closet, because, you know, things will come out and fall in them. Yeah, man, we're doing all that. We're cleaning up. We're making sure the bathroom is tidy and that our kids are well dressed and that they don't have dirt on their face like they do every other time. And we want to make sure the yard's mowed, and we want to make sure that everything's in order. And that's exactly what Martha was doing. Let's look in Luke chapter 10, verse 40. It says, but Martha, I want to start earlier. Let's go to verse 38. As they went on their way, he entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at Yeshua's feet and heard his word. But Martha was distracted. She was focused. She was paying attention to the house. She was distracted with much serving. And she came up to him and said, Sovereign, don't you care that my sister left me to serve alone? That makes me giggle, because that's exactly what we'd have said. If we were preparing the house, and that's what maybe our wives would have said, men. Can you imagine? He left me to cook, to clean, and to do all this prep work, and yet here he is in there lounging with the guests. Maybe you can relate to that. Maybe you can't. It's okay. Don't worry about it. And she said, don't you care that my sister left me to serve alone? Ask her, therefore, to help me. She's wanting Yeshua to reprimand Mary. And Yeshua answered her, Martha, Martha, just like when your mom yells your name, your first name and your middle name, you know you're in trouble. When Holy Scripture says the name 2 times, it's basically the same thing, okay? Like, That's, Brian, Keith, Wilson, you get your butt, that's the same thing as Martha, Martha. So here's Yeshua's response. Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed. Mary has chosen the good part, which will not be taken away from her. So, what does the king expect from us? That's a good question. Now, we're not going to get into all of the doctrine here, and if you'd like to discuss that with me later, I'd love to have that conversation with you out in the foyer area. So just come up to me and let's debate those items, but not right now, because I want to move on and get to maybe some more of the meat of this material, and that is maybe overcoming some perfectionist tendencies. So, of course, it's reasonable to do our best and to give Yahweh all our effort and strive for excellence, but does he expect perfection? Due to our emphasis on keeping the commandments to foster holiness, we can often mistake sanctification for justification. Now, I'm talking about a heavenly perfection right now, so let's go on. I want to bring it home to the family. When I was doing some marriage counseling a few weeks ago, I was reading this book by Gary Chapman called Things I Wish I'd Known Before I Got Married. How many of you could write that book today? Yeah, that's every married couple in here. Things I Wish I'd Known Before I Got Married. It's a great book. But as I was reading it, I was looking at some of the dysfunctional things that Gary was talking about that people bring into the marriage. Dysfunctional things. And as I read this paragraph, I immediately knew this was my home and Amanda's home. And it talks about perfectionism, again, as a dysfunctional family. And a family that will allow kids to bring baggage into their marriage. Here's what he said. Perfectionism is rarely considered an unhealthy symptom, but it is a common source of many family problems, especially in Christian homes. After all, isn't the challenge of the Christian life to be perfect as God is perfect? Not really. Christians are called to live a life of excellence. Excellence is attainable. Perfection is not. Expecting perfect behavior from spouse or children, even in a Christian family, is living in a world of unreality. A perfectionist parent conveys, now I want you to hone in here because this is where it hit me. A perfectionist parent conveys his or her standards and expectations through verbal rebukes, corrections, frowns, penetrating glances, smirks, and so on, which continually imply it's not good enough. He lives and leads by oughts, shoulds, and musts. These are, quote, torture words that elevate guilt and lower self-esteem. So here's the harsh reality. You're not a perfect parent. You don't have perfect kids. You need to get used to disappointment because we're all human. Research says that there are 3 ways of being a perfectionist: inflicting high standards on yourself, having unrealistic standards for those around you, and believing everyone in life expects your perfection. I'm going to say those again. There are 3 ways of being a perfectionist: inflicting high standards on yourself, having unrealistic standards on those around you, and believing everyone in life expects your perfection. Not everyone is a perfectionist, thank Yahweh, but many of us are. If you're not a perfectionist, you almost certainly know one or are probably living with one. If you know a perfectionist, no, I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. If the perfectionist is sitting next to you, point them out. Just kidding. Now here I want to just go into some little background here, some research on perfectionism. Some folks were born with perfectionist tendencies. Maybe you know kids like this. I'm not sure yet if my daughter Eden is a perfectionist, but I can tell you she's into fashion, because when she was younger than a year old, we had this tub of garage sale shoes that we had acquired, and also hand-me-downs, because that's the way we do things. And I love that. So here we have this tub, and it's a decent-sized tub, and it's got all these different sizes of shoes for the next couple of years. And now here's Eden in her bedroom. I'm telling you, she's less than a year old, and she's pulling out these shoes, and she's lining them up, and she's putting them in pairs. That's when I knew it was game over. I'm just looking at her going, oh my goodness, you haven't even learned how to walk yet. You're already organizing your shoe closet. So some kids are born with perfectionist tendencies. They have a good sense of order, being on time, tidiness, and doing things just right. Others have developed perfectionism as a way to cope with childhood pain brought on by difficult family circumstances, such as substance addictions, dysfunction, broken families, compulsive addictions, and other forms of abuse, such as physical, verbal, or sexual abuse. In many cases, children learn what they must do in order to be noticed and accepted by struggling parents. So if you've got a dad or a mom that's ignoring their kids, kids will figure out a way to get the attention of a parent so that they'll give them their approval. That approval can come in a lot of different ways. I was reading one story. This young man was a teenager, and he was saying that whenever he was in high school, he was basically completely unnoticed by his dad. Dad never talked to him. His mom and him had the relationship, but when he was 16 or 17 or 18, his dad noticed that he was getting really good grades, enough to get into some really nice colleges. And his dad all of a sudden opened up and wanted to invest in him and get him to this college or that college to get into an Ivy League school. And the kid said it was so uncomfortable, all of the pressure and so on, trying to get to know my dad, who was really only interested in me being successful for his own ego. So parents, struggling parents can oftentimes put this negative environment in place. Maybe it's at home with alcohol abuse or it's drug abuse or whatever, and kids learn to become perfectionists in order to keep mom and dad happy. And that's a really deep thing that you might consider if you feel like you fit into the perfectionist category. And there are books you can read and so on with tests you can take. And if you want some information on that, I'd be happy to share that with you later. But if that's you, and you've lived a life where the only way to get mom and dad's approval was to do things perfectly, then that might be where that perfectionism comes from. Children often receive these messages that they need to be perfect through harsh verbal communication, body language, and facial cues like eye rolling or disgruntled looks. As you remember what Gary Chapman was saying, verbal rebukes, corrections, frowns, penetrating glances, smirks, and so on, which continually imply it's not good enough. And when a kid hears it's not good enough, what they really hear is, you're not good enough. Perfectionism isn't always bad. There are blessings that come from being on time, keeping a clean house, and ensuring that people can find books at the library. How many of you have ever seen or heard or talked to a perfectionist librarian? Yeah. How many of you are thankful that pilots know what they're doing? Or that a surgeon has a good grasp on the structure of the brain as he saws the top of your head off? Or that a paramedic knows how to do CPR? So there are things in life where we expect excellence, where we expect perfection. But we all know that no matter how good the surgeon is, no matter how trained the pilot is, that there's always going to be moments of weakness and flaws, right? Because they're human. And so perfection still in all of those fields and more fields is an unreasonable expectation. So there are positives to being a perfectionist, but there are often really dangerous aspects of perfectionism, especially in the family environment. Children of perfectionist parents can begin to feel as though they'll never measure up to parents' impossible standards. So many times we emphasize performance and equate performance to acceptance. This can lead to some damaging outcomes in the life of a child as they transition into adulthood, including low sense of self-worth, lack of confidence, laziness, poor body image. Often we sense the need for perfection in ourselves, and we transfer that to our own children. They become an extension of us, and we criticize them when they don't perform. Your child isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing it, the way you want them to be doing it perfectly. And so you feel like because they're not doing it right, you're not doing it right. And so we criticize them and take them to the cleaners. Now, I want you to know that as we talked about, children can be perfectionists also. And we're not going to get into that tonight, but there are, ways that you can help your child cope through perfectionism. By the way, it's important to know that perfectionism is actually not a disorder. It's not like OCD or anything like that. And so don't think of it as a disorder. It's actually a trained behavior. In a lot of cases, it's a trained coping behavior that we develop in ourselves to deal with difficult circumstances, almost like a defense mechanism. But what happens is that when we're children, that defense mechanism builds up and it becomes a habit, and that habit becomes a lifestyle. And we get to marriage, and we don't really know that we're perfectionists, but our wives or our husbands quickly point it out because they didn't know it either. And had they known, they'd have probably reconsidered. And so that's, that just wanted you to know that it's not a disorder, but because perfectionism can be useful, like I'm saying, if it's managed. Another byproduct of perfectionism is control. When we feel like things aren't going perfectly or some crisis happens, we can respond with outbursts of anger and frustration in an attempt to maintain control. These outbursts typically come from a deeper emotional response of fear. When we feel like things are getting out of control, we respond aggressively to regain order. An example of this could be a teenager who steps outside of your spiritual morals and your family. They have a moral failing or whatever. It's not uncommon for parents to overreact and lay down harsh punishment to sway their children back to right living. When I sit down with my youth group, and I've done this on more than one occasion, we have about 20 or 30 from time to time, and I ask them about telling the truth to mom and dad. They so oftentimes will not give their moms and dads the truth because they're afraid of an overreaction. They would prefer to lie and risk it than to come clean because of the abundance of retribution that might fall on them. In addition to that, some of them have said that their parents are already expecting them to fail. And because the expectation to fail is already in their parents' mind, they think to themselves, what's the point? I may as well step out anyway because they already think that I'm going to. So just keep that in mind when it comes to maintaining control in the perfectionist home. We don't want to respond so harshly that we convince them that what they're doing was actually better. If you're a perfectionist, odds are you already know how your perfectionism is affecting your family and relationships. So now it's time to consider what you can do to address the negative consequences of perfectionism in your home. So hey, I just want to share with you a few ideas. And if you're, I would say that I didn't always think of myself as a perfectionist. And I just want to also say that there are people in the world who are sort of pocket perfectionists. And if you don't feel like, well, I'm not an overblown perfectionist, that's fine. But there are people who are pocket perfectionists. What that means is there's certain areas of their life that they want to be perfect. So it's not everything, If the dishes aren't done, maybe that doesn't bother them, or whatever. But there are certain things where they're like, I got to get this right. And sometimes that can be at work. Sometimes that can be in relationship to the assembly or so on. So pocket perfectionists. So here's what we want to talk about. Let's talk about some steps you can take to overcome perfectionism. The first thing is you and your wife or husband should have a conversation about your perfectionism. That should typically start with the person who is the perfectionist. Because if the other person starts that conversation, it's going to be perceived as criticism. And perfectionists don't like criticism. All right? Or unsolicited advice. Thanks, Amanda. Now, if you've taken the Enneagram and you're a number 1, that means you're the best. It also means that the tendencies of you being a perfectionist are really high. So maybe some of you don't know about the Enneagram, but my wife's an Enneagram person, and we really like that. So find out more about that later. I'll give you the website or whatever. But anyway, if you feel like, well, after reflection, I think that maybe I've got some perfectionist tendencies. I can see that it's damaging my relationship with my kids. Or maybe I've got a friend that I can see that my perfectionism is getting between us. Or maybe it's your marriage. You're the person that needs to say, all right, let's take a time out. I'm ready to talk about this. Maybe you get a book or you listen to some podcasts or whatever. So the first thing is just to acknowledge what's going on. And then create sort of an agreement between you and your spouse. And that is that if a time of perfection, as I'm working through this problem, which by the way isn't going to go away tomorrow, but as I'm working through it, we can sort of be accountable to each other. And perhaps you can gently help me whenever you see that I'm getting into a situation where I'm exercising over perfectionism. Realizing that you're in a marriage which is based on interdependence. Children start out their lives going through the stage of dependence. They need us to feed them, to clothe them, to protect them, to teach them how to walk, talk, and then to be quiet. And then we move on to the adolescent years where children start developing independence, where they're pushing away from mom. They're creating their own sense of identity. They like their own music. They want to dress their own way, and they want their hair to look that way. Then we move on to adulthood or maturity. Some of us are still working on that. And we learn about interdependence, where we realize that 1 is not good enough, 2 is better. Like the Bible says, it's not good for man to be alone. We get married and we become interdependent, where I'm letting down my guard and I'm depending on you and you're depending on me, and we have a relationship together. Interdependence. So we have to discuss the issue with your spouse and let them lovingly encourage you when you're acting out your perfectionism. Another thing, you can start some accountability with maybe a mentor or a friend that you trust. Don't pick anybody. Pick somebody that's going to actually lovingly invest in you and not just tear you down. But that mentorship program, and talk to them about how your perfectionism is affecting your kids and so on. And then we can come up with some solutions together and they can hold you accountable. When thinking about your behavior and how your perfectionism is affecting your family, you can do a simple activity by yourself or together with your spouse. A blessings and curses chart. Real simple. You get a piece of paper, you write perfectionism at the top, or my perfectionism, or whatever you want to call it, and you have a blessings column and you have a curses column. Think about all the ways that your perfectionism blesses your family and your relationships. And then think about all the ways your perfectionism hurts your family and your relationships. And then grade those things. So you've got a column of blessings. We're always on time to church. That's worth 10 points. Or I like to do the dishes and to make sure that they're clean. How many of you know that you can do dishes, but they may not be clean at the end of it? All right? So you're like that person. I like my dishes to be clean. I want them to be clear. Or maybe you've got some laundry you've got going. And how many of you know you can do laundry and your laundry's still not clean? So maybe that's worth 5 points, okay? You've got I like to brush my teeth 4 times a day or whatever. And that's worth 2 points. I'm not sure. So you grade yourselves. You give yourself some points. You add that up. And then you go into the curses, section. Well, because I'm a perfectionist, I really look down on my kids when they fail. That's going to cost me 30 points. Whatever it is. And you grade yourself and you see how your perfectionism is affecting your family. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, cool. Give it a try. Consider the areas in your family where you can lower expectations of yourself and others. Here's an idea. Sometimes we set ourselves up for failure and disappointment because our expectations are so high. Right? Now, because I'm a perfectionist and I realize that about myself, I'm really trying to change. Over the last week, I've made a lot of progress. Just kidding. One of the areas I'm a perfectionist I'll just let you know, is on my yard work. Like my yard to look good. Got a beautiful green John Deere tractor. Traded a beautiful red four-wheeler to buy it. I'm not sure if that means anything to you, but it means a lot to me. And we moved into a house with a big yard, and I needed to have a mower more than I needed a four-wheeler, so I sold it and bought a mower. And I've always wanted a green tractor. It's my favorite. Hopefully one day I'll get an even bigger one. This is a very miniature one. They get bigger, you know. Sometimes I'll go to the John Deere store and just walk around and see all the things I can't afford. Anyway, I've got this beautiful green machine. I love it. But it's time to start passing off the responsibility of mowing to my boys. And when I was a kid, you've heard this before, when I was a kid, I had to push that yard uphill both ways. And, you know, my dad didn't let me have a riding lawnmower. He didn't have a riding lawnmower. So there's nothing better than to let my kids start off push mowing. Well, that's the way I was. So I let the boys start with the push mowing, and, you know, they see this beautiful green machine, and they're like, why can't we use that? And I was like, because I couldn't. That's all. That's the only reason I had. I couldn't. Why should you? And then I got to think, well, that's not really, you know, the best way to live. So I decided I was going to let them start using my green machine. So I let Abraham, my 10-year-old, use it. And the first time, I'm not kidding, the first time. This story's going to go on. I'm just going to get to the right thing. He ran out of gas. I was inside. Because I'm a perfectionist and he knows it, he didn't come to me and let me know that he's out of gas. He's just going to fix it on his own. He's going to take initiative because he doesn't want to deal with me. I don't blame him. So he, in his infinite 10-year-old wisdom, decides that he's going to open the hood. Where else would the gas tank be? So he opens the hood. He finds the oil valve. Takes the oil valve out, says, this is really small. I should probably get a funnel, which he knows where it is. So he goes and he grabs a funnel, grabs the 5 gallons of gas, and he goes over there and commences to fill the engine with gasoline. He gets done. He's pretty proud of himself. Puts the cap back on, puts the hood back down, gets out back on that motor. Nothing but white smoke. Won't start. Dang it, he says. Now I got to go in and talk to the perfectionist dad who already told me, this is my baby. I love it more than you do. Don't mess with my baby. Dad, the mower won't start. All right, what's going on? It's blowing white smoke. Whoop, red flag. Go out there, first thing I see, hood's up. What are you doing with the hood up? Putting gas in there. Long story short, he put a dang near, I can't believe how much gasoline will fit in an engine. It was a lot. We drained that sucker out. I tried to maintain my cool because I'm a perfectionist. I like to get angry. When I lose control, I like to lose control. I like to regain control by yelling because that makes a lot of sense, and making people feel bad around me because that's awesome. And I tried not to do that this time, and I just said, all right, man, this is what happened. And they're gritting my teeth. This is the universal symbol for oil. Showed it to him. This is the universal symbol for gasoline. Showed it to him. Next time he got on the mower, I told him, said, now you got to watch out when you're mowing because there's things in the yard that the mower can run over. And specifically, Gunner, our dog's dog chain. Don't run over that. No problem. I'm actually outside and hear him hit that chain, which was a cable, wrapped up in the mower, shut it off right away. He said to me, I didn't think that it would matter because it was lower than the grass. He didn't know that a mower creates a vacuum and sucks things up. Don't worry about it. Why am I sharing this with you? I'm sharing this with you because perfectionists can overcome. They can rise to the occasion of being better parents, being better moms, being better dads. They can learn to cope with their perfectionism. They can learn to work through disappointment and to really lower the expectations. He's 10. It can be replaced. Bottom line, you're putting him on a $2,000 machine, turn him loose. What's the worst that could happen? What is the worst? The worst that can happen is he could get his leg chopped off, I guess. But as soon as his little booty gets off the seat, it's going to shut off right away. I'm smart enough to know that, so that's not even really a risk. Consider lowering your expectations so that your kids don't disappoint you. Depending on how high your expectations are, you could be setting yourself up for disappointment. In what areas of perfection can you adjust to a more reasonable goal of excellence from your kids and from your spouse? What should we expect from ourselves, children, and others? Think about that. What should I reasonably expect from myself and my kids? Here's another thing. We can share our failures. This is where we talked about, just sort of letting go and just saying, hey, you know what? Maybe you're talking to a friend. Maybe you're talking to Maybe you're talking to your spouse, you're saying, you know what, I realize that this is a problem. Not only is it creating trouble for me, it's creating trouble for our family. It's creating trouble for my relationships. And I want to confess what the Bible says, which is good for the soul, that I'm a perfectionist and I can do better. Accept the truth. Perfectionism is a snare. It's a trap. It feeds fear and anxiety created by childhood hurt. Accept the doctrine of grace and justification, that you're good enough, and so are your kids. All right, let's talk about some easy takeaways here. And real quick, I've got 30 seconds. Ready? Fasting. Here we go. Understanding the concept of excellence versus perfection. Certainly, we should desire to thrive, to do things as if for the master, right? Yes. But we want to make sure that we're doing it for the right reasons, and that is for excellence, not for perfection. Here's some takeaways. There are many causes of perfectionism. Being a perfectionist isn't a disorder, but it can cause relational trouble if left uncontrolled. Recognize the truth. Perfection isn't a reality, and consider your perfectionism and evaluate areas of growth. That's it. 3 seconds. Thank you so much for paying attention tonight. Hope you had a great time. Here comes Dwayne.
Thank you, Keith.
You're welcome.
Really great. I love the story of the lawnmowers.
Yeah.
I'm actually glad that was your lawnmower, not mine.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. But mine's coming. We've had our own issues with lawnmowers. I really like the point that you made, even at the end here, the takeaway that excellence is attainable and perfection is not. So one of the things that you said that I really thought, resonates with me and with my children, and I think it's something maybe we could just talk a little bit about. But how does the perfectionist, having unrealistic standards of those around you, and I think you connected that to the way that children hear that is that you're just not good enough. And it has a really lasting effect on that. Yeah. Give me some of the ways that plays out, or like even maybe you're thinking about your yard and the way that you see that, and then kind of slowing that conversation down and looking for something good.
Well, and first of all, it builds a tremendous amount of pressure in your home. Yeah. How many of you can relate to that? Pressure to perform, pressure to succeed, pressure to do the right thing at the right time. So that pressure comes out in your kids, and it creates stress in them. These are kids, and they're stressed out at the age of 10. They're stressed out at the age of 12. And so what it does is, as I reflect as being a kid myself, sometimes I would fear when maybe a parent would come home. If you have a perfectionist mom or dad, it would stress you out. Like, they're going to come home, I was supposed to do this or that. I wonder if I've done it right or good enough, because I'm fearful of their wrath or their judgment. So a lot of pressure.
I think that's a really good distinction to make, and for all of us to realize as parents that, it's our words sometimes that get in the way of the things that we're really trying to do. When we should be training moments, we're having kind of freak out moments, which is another thing that I think some of us are prone to do, is have those moments where we're freaking out. And I really liked, your insight with the youth when they come and they say they just don't want to tell their parents. What would you tell parents to do when their children tells them something really crazy that they're going to freak out about?
Yeah.
How do you stop that freak out moment, and kind of maybe some steps or some things where you can slow that down? I'm sure you've had a lot of time to think about that, as I have.
Yeah. First of all, don't freak out. I mean, bottom line, Dad, I'm pregnant. I'm not kidding you. I was practicing with Noah, because he's in my youth group and we talk openly. Noah, let's just practice, because we want to keep the communication open. I said, tell me something that you think I'd freak out about. He said, Dad, I got a girl pregnant. That's what he said. I was like, okay, all right, how am I going to breathe through this, right? Because here's the thing, at the end of the day, she's pregnant, right? Or whatever it is. I mean, that reality is here. So freaking out about it, blowing up about it, exploding about it is not going to bring any benefit. And it's just a lack of self-control on our parts and the part of the parents. And then the second thing, I mean, if you've got to just take a minute, not say anything, I'm serious, breathe through it, or whatever. Say things positive, like, okay, we're going to get through this. We can manage this. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for being honest. And really encourage your kids to be honest, because that's the only thing that you can really build your trust on.
Sure. Well, the beautiful part about the Family Builders Conference is after every session that we have like this, we'll take some of your questions and some of your thoughts about it. So if you have something that you're thinking about, get ready. In a couple of minutes, I'll be asking for those questions. I had one more thing that I was going to ask you about, but I seem to not have my notes. But in general, what do you think the best thing for you as you've identified yourself as being a perfectionist? Give me like the one thing that has really stabilized that. Because in being perfect, of course, there are a lot of positives to that. The things that you mentioned before about being on time and holding things accountable and things like. So there's really lots of good things. So how do you control it when it seems to be maybe getting a little bit out of control?
Try to talk less.
Try to talk less.
Yeah, because sometimes we can't outrun our own words. Coming into an experience where somebody's or maybe even you've made a mistake. And sometimes, especially for the perfectionist, they're their worst critic. Perfectionists don't need people to point out all the faults. They know them. They're constantly playing over in our minds. I'm not good enough. I messed up. You can do better. You need to be better. You have to be better. People are depending on you. People are relying on you. There's expectations. So we don't need to hear that. So when that moment comes, there are some self-talk things that you can do maybe. And reading scriptures, like while we were yet sinners, Messiah died for us, and he didn't come seeking those people that were the strongest or the wisest or the most capable. He used the weak things to shame the wise. So there's some positive messages that Scripture gives us to encourage us through that. But really, especially with dealing with other people, if you've got an expectation, it's really high, and your kids are failing, just smile, breathe through it, and then just don't talk. Just give yourself a minute and just try to control. And I think that's the thing is just looking at yourself in the mirror. Like, what do I look like? And I know what I look like when I lose control, right? I know what my kids are seeing, and I hate it because I swore I look like my dad, and I swore I'd never do that to my kids. How many of you have that? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, I swore I'd never be like that, and that's what I'm like. Yeah. So I know what I look like. I know what I sound like. Yeah. And I know what they feel like.
I know. When we all have those times where we just have to add a little grace to whatever we're doing, and then sometimes to ourselves we have to add that grace. We don't want to overdo that, but we certainly don't want to underdo that to the extent to where when we see it's breaking our relationships, we have to have some release in some way to to forgive those things and move past it. And so I think we all need a little more grace for each other.
I think
Anybody have any questions or any comments that they'd like to ask Keith or add to the talk?
We're positive only.
We have one over
here. No
here.
negative.
Actually, we take all kinds.
We do take all kinds, yeah.
Just allowing for that.
Thank you for your talk. You had said that there were 3 ways to be a perfectionist.
Yes.
And so I'm asking for a friend.
Sure you are.
If you have more on the list, does that mean you're more of a perfectionist or worst degree of being a perfectionist? If you have more things?
Yeah. So, yes, the answer to that question is yes. I mean, if you've got more, so you're saying that you've got, in addition to inflicting high standards on yourself, having unrealistic standards of those around you, and believing everyone expects your perfection, you've got additional things that you feel like add to your perfectionism. So it's not you, your friend. Obviously, the friend, Jim. Yeah, okay, so that's great. And in some of the research that I've done, there are different, for example, there's one book I read where there was 3 kinds of perfectionism. There was just a general test you take to talk about perfectionism. And then there was an overt perfectionist. They know they're a perfectionist, and so does everyone around them. And then there's the, not overt, but like a closet perfectionist, but it's, what is it? Covert. Thank you. Who said covert? Bless you. Thank you. Covert perfectionists. So they're perfectionists inside, but they don't let really anybody know about it. And so you can be at different degrees of perfectionism. And again, you don't want to just slap a label on yourself. Well, I'm a perfectionist and I'm a loser. You might just think about areas in your life where you expect that perfection and then consider, how is this affecting my relationships? Because if you've got, let's just say you make the best, brownie, strawberry and pineapple and whipped cream dessert that I've ever had, there's no reason to do second best on that. You just keep going. So there's areas in our lives where perfectionism's fine. Supposing that it's affecting your relationship, that's when you should consider it and give pause. Does that make sense? Yeah, so you don't have to be like a perfectionist in general. You can have pockets of perfectionism, but as long as it's not the negative. Anyone else have? Yes, we got a question over here.
Great presentation. You mentioned a passage of Scripture. You said that we're to be perfect because our Father in heaven is perfect. And I know this is about our nuclear family.
Sure.
The whole weekend. But the church itself is also a family.
Absolutely.
And I've seen a lot of damage from legalistic tendencies that creep into the church. So could you just speak briefly to that problem?
Sure, and I appreciate that comment. And again, I think if you do some research into the idea of perfection, it's completeness. And perfectionism, or you should be holy for your Father in heaven is holy, is not speaking to perfection, it's speaking to completeness. It's speaking to being mature, which is the work of the Holy Spirit in our lives, is to bring us to maturity, is to bring us to sanctification or holiness. I guess my thing that I would throw out there as an idea for you to consider, anybody else to consider, is that so oftentimes when we look at keeping the commandments, the Torah, and restoring the Hebraic way, which we believe is right, holy, and good, that's what Paul said, legalism can creep in. Paul says that the law, knowledge makes arrogant, but love edifies. So we know that there's that caution there. So I would challenge anybody to look into the difference and consider that righteousness is different than holiness. Righteousness is the state of being right before Yahweh, to being at right standing before Yahweh. To be declared righteous, one accepts the faith of Yeshua, his blood on Calvary for our sins, and the fact that that's going to be with us for the rest of our lives. Holiness, however, is the act of becoming holy through whatever means of holiness that there is. Making sure that your relationships are good, keeping the Torah, and so on. And when we get into these legalistic, expectations, while they are expectations and they're certainly good for our lives, it can create a great place of judgment. And I believe that's because of a misplaced emphasis on keeping the commandments for righteousness instead of keeping them for holiness. The righteousness is only through faith. Paul says if righteousness came through the works of the law, then there would not have been any need for faith that speaks, righteousness that speaks of faith. That would be my answer, okay? And so just, and that's, we're getting knee deep in doctrine there, but just, if you'll just allow me that, and, we can Bible study it until 3 o'clock this morning if you want to, but that's what I would suggest. And as the assembly, maybe Dwayne could speak to it as well, it's really easy to become critical.
I think that's one of the ideas that we're talking about in this concept of being, hypercritical or hyper-perfect about it, is that you do get a hypercritical, hyper-judgment, and it becomes a place to where, if we were looking at it as the Scripture says, excel still more, that's a place of encouragement and support.
Sure.
So we have to have accountability, but at the same time, we have to have a heart of love, and we certainly have to have grace for those around us that are in need of it.
Yeah.
And I think that plays out in the assembly all the time, to where we get knee-deep into a debate when we get staunch in our pride or our ego, and instead of looking at the person, we're looking at the ideas, and we forget about the person and let it go to that personal place where it's really not a great place for us to end up because it destroys relationships.
Sure.
So I think that's for sure. And there was also someone that had an insight about being here and maybe being single, or what's the family builders got for me here. And I think that this applies to the assembly all the way. These
Sure.
ideas, these concepts that we can learn about, we can bring those right into the assembly and use them in things, no matter what your status is as far as that's concerned. So all of these topics are relevant to life in more ways than just one. But we really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Let's hear it one more time for Keith.
Thank you so much.
Perfectionism.
Appreciate your time.